What's the definition of a difficult conversation? A difficult conversation is a conversation that you keep putting off. People in senior positions need to proactively seek out the difficult conversations. Otherwise, the people lower down will stay silent, and some really important practice knowledge and practice wisdom will be lost. The drama spiral is one of those models that I can explain in 5 minutes, but it took me 25 years to develop. It doesn't matter what the power differential is between the two of you. If you're co-working and co-delivering a piece of work in front of other colleagues, the two of you are equals. When we, as a theater company, go into a prison, what we represent is not authority and oppression. What we represent is freedom. And when I say huggy, I don't literally mean physical hugging, because I think you can hug people with your voice, the way that you look at them, how you position yourself near to them. It doesn't take any longer to be attuned as to be unattuned to the people that you're working with. If you're reading some distress on them, you could take 2 minutes with them, and it could help to transform their day. 2 minutes.
It's an honor to host Dr. Clark Baim today, a conversation that's been about 2 years in the making. Clark is a psychotherapist, a senior trainer in psychodrama, clinical supervisor, and organizational consultant with 35 plus years of work across more than 30 countries. He's the director of the Birmingham Institute for Psychodrama, past honorary president of the British Psychodrama Association, and the mind behind the frameworks that I've leaned on heavily in my own participatory performance. I hope you have as many haha moments as I have every time I interact with Dr. Clark and his work. I'm very interested in how to access problems, and I think we call it unresolved challenges. And I'm trying to get to it in a way that is not too pathos, too suffering, too negative. At some point, I read you and I see the spiral that you've created to explain. And I was amazed just through my own experimentation personally and through the groups I was facilitating for. I came across your work and I realized when I saw the diagrams you put together in order for us to understand, I thought how powerful it was. So how do you work at the moment with organizations? Our podcast is mostly towards CEOs, leaders, HR professionals. We are mostly in Southeast Asia, but we are also having a presence globally. We are mostly in topics of transformation around technology. So we never really go that deep. I think there are mindset changes, but I don't think we use a psychodrama, for instance. And I wonder how you work with companies who are less into the depth of psychology and psychodrama.
Well, I would say one of the unifying threads would be personal stories. Anytime you are speaking with people about anything to do with their background as a professional or their educational background, or if it's appropriate, their personal background, you have the opportunity to listen to their personal stories. And when you mentioned the drama spiral earlier, that's really what I was doing my PhD on. For 6 years, I researched how people's personal stories are accessed and utilized and presented to public audiences, either electronically or in person, and how that can be done safely and ethically. So I would say that even if you're not calling whatever you're doing psychology or psychotherapy, you can still be psychologically informed, and that might help you to make the right choices as you go forward and ask the right questions and keep things within the appropriate boundaries for the time that you have allotted and people's understanding of what they're showing up for that day.
Okay, got it. Do you work with organizational behavior? Is it something you do?
I certainly have done. I would say one of the main areas that I do that sort of training in is with NGOs, with charities, and quite a lot of my work has been with criminal justice professionals. I've done rather little work strictly in the corporate field, but certainly with organizations large and small. And I would say one of the key aspects of the work that I have done training people in organizations is around co-working, how to build really good co-working relationships, particularly where you have to co-deliver work together, whether that's running a group together or running a meeting together, collaborating on projects together, and how there can be smooth, respectful, and empathic communication between co-workers live and in the moment as you're proceeding through the work.
Got it.
My book on that topic is called Mindful Co-working, and it was published through Jessica Kingsley Publishers about a decade ago. And that's got all of the tips that I developed over the years and the procedures, the processes for building a good co-working relationship, as well as how you work it in the moment.
Can you tell me a bit about what are the kind of tips you give? Maybe the driving insights of the book as well.
Well, one of them, for example, is that it doesn't matter what the power differential is between the two of you or the experience levels between the two of you. If you're co-working and co-delivering a piece of work in front of other colleagues or in front of an audience, the two of you are equals. And that means that the senior person allows the junior person to shine, to look good, and is very open to their ideas, very open to their contributions, draws them in proactively. And what I saw, and the reason that I developed, that's just one of about 10 principles we teach in mindful co-working. One of the things we saw very typically is that the junior person would just assume they're to sort of make the tea and to take care of some of the practical things, but the more senior person, they're there to do the main work. And say, well, actually, that's a lost opportunity because the junior person might be in a position to ask fresh questions, to offer a fresh perspective. In addition to that, it's a lost opportunity for growth and development for that junior person if the senior person does all of the work. In my book, I take quite a lot of practical suggestions from the airline industry and how pilots and co-pilots operate in the cabin as they're running aircraft, share power and authority, and how the less experienced pilot is helped to grow and develop. I draw on that quite a bit in the Mindful Co-working book because they've had to give a huge amount of thought to how pilots and co-pilots communicate. And they've learned this by listening to the recordings when things go wrong. Say, okay, so each time there's an incident, how do we improve communication? So that's just one example.
I'm wondering how you came across theater, how you came across that journey of the spiral. Why did you get interested in this? And why did the PhD lasted 7 years? Usually the target is like 2-3 years. So why did you go so deep and why on this topic?
Well, the PhD was a part-time PhD while I was working. So that's why it was so as long as it did. But in some ways, the PhD took me 25 years because the drama spiral, which you read, is one of those models that I can explain in 5 minutes, but it took me 25 years to develop. And to me, it's an indicator that the model is effective, that I can actually teach it in about 5 minutes. And I teach it to adults, practitioners. I also teach it to teenagers who are in the care system who are doing a theater project, and I can explain it to them in 5 minutes and they just get it. So it's one of those really just useful common sense models. You asked me how I got into the theater. I got into the theater when I was in my early 20s. I'd studied theater as an undergraduate. I did small-scale theater in Chicago, which is the city I grew up in. And I, just as an acting job, got a job with a prison theater company, touring all around America, doing interactive issue-based theater. And when we would perform improvisational theater, getting the inmate audiences very much involved in the characters on stage, getting quite invested emotionally in their success and giving them advice. And so we would take the advice from the inmate audiences and play out scenarios. And later on, this form of theater got called applied theater. And it's about how theater is used for community and social purposes. It was very much aligned with my ethics, my reasons for wanting to go into the theater, to have a positive effect on people's lives. So we would tend to do workshops with inmates after our performances. And those workshops would tend to evoke stories that they were interested in, stories that they wanted to tell. And so quite naturally, I began to elicit personal stories because those were the stories that they knew, that they were interested in sharing with others. And without knowing it, I was easing towards psychodrama, which is a form of group psychotherapy that utilizes the key techniques from the theater. It's been around for more than 100 years now, created by Jacob Moreno, who was a psychiatrist as well as a theater person. So without knowing it, I was already discovering psychodrama. And then just through my own curiosity and a few lucky breaks, I discovered that there were very good trainers available to me in psychodrama. And throughout the 90s and into the early 2000s, I studied psychodrama. That was an 8-year training program. I was able to follow my curiosity as deep as it would go in terms of how theater and theater methods can be used safely, ethically, and effectively to help people tell their stories, even when those stories are very triggering and very sensitive stories for them. And that's when you need to know what you're doing if you're working with unresolved traumatic stories. And then I wanted to bring it all together and say, how do I make sense of this career? So one way I can make sense of it is by helping other people to understand what are some of the distinctions between what happens in the theater processes, what happens in psychodrama processes, and are there some useful distinctions? Are there some useful tools, techniques, boundaries that I can effectively teach? And that has proven to be very attractive to applied theater people, because applied theater very often uses people's personal stories. And so applied theater artists are very interested to know how to do that safely and ethically without exploiting people, leaving them raw and vulnerable, and indeed without damaging audiences. And this does have crossovers into things like reality television, Beverly Housewives, all of those programs that use real people, real situations, real stories. There's a lot of work being done on the ethics of that kind of broadcast television, but also in the theater. And I was able to make use of a lot of the thinking and the writing that's been done about that and add a bit to it of my own with that particular model, the drama spiral that you referred to.
Yeah, just to feed on what you just said, I tried to be an artist, like an actor, basically, a semi-professional. I failed, but that's when I realized how some states, some emotions would carry with me at night, despite our director being aware of what you're talking about and trying to close the container. After, I think, a few weeks of training every day, of rehearsing, someone depressed with a bit of anger issues, I could see myself change, but not for the best. I promised myself never to take a negative role again because I was really feeling bad. And then I also went to another experience, which was Tony Robbins' UPW, Unleash the Power Within kind of thing. And I saw 15,000 people raise their energy. And I realized he was using theater. He was just doing an improv class basically with 15,000 people. So I saw the power of the two. And I was wondering, when you were talking, when you did the prison work, what was the point? Was it to entertain people? Because there's an entertainment part coming from method acting and also hearing real stories. There is the story to tell, so the content more than the entertainment, so the telling the stories. And then there's the trauma healing. Which of the three was the focus? Like, how did it start? And did you discover the other two afterwards, or you were aware of the three aspects from the start?
Well, certainly if you're getting up on the stage in front of 500 inmates in a gymnasium and you're there for an hour and a half, you better have some entertainment value if you're going to hold them. So we were 5 to 7 people on stage doing improvisational comedy, drama, but very issue-based. And I think that was possibly the main thing that attracted to them. We weren't by our nature comedians. I certainly wouldn't call myself a comic actor, but the situations on stage would often be very humorous. And they would be humorous in that the inmate audiences could see the irony of the situations. They would get quite invested in these characters because a character would come to a moment of crisis, a situation that we would generate based on their suggestions. We'd come to a moment of crisis, a moment of decision. An inmate, for example, is having a visit from his wife and there's a family crisis going on. And he's also dealing with feelings of jealousy, feelings of being left out, feeling that the world is changing while he's stuck inside. And he's got this burning jealousy at the same time she's reaching out for some advice and assistance and support because their 12-year-old boy is beginning to run with the wrong crowd and she needs his help. She needs him to give some fatherly advice to his son. Meanwhile, he's preoccupied with his own. So now we turn to the audience and we say, what do I say to her? And we get some great advice, we get some bad advice, we get people screaming from the back, we get banter back and forth between the stage and the audience. It's an incredibly lively interaction. And then we play out a suggestion, maybe it's a positive suggestion, and then we come to the next critical moment. Maybe we turn to them. Sometimes the inmates would get so frustrated with the characters on stage, they'd say, get out of the way and let me show you. And they'd come up on stage. And then so it's this very dynamic form of performance. And when it was going well, that's when we knew we really had our audiences. And you can just imagine the profundity of one of these inmates getting up on his feet, and he's so activated about the character on stage that he wants to say, cut all the crap. This is what I want you to know, how you talk to your wife or your girlfriend, or how you talk to that prison officer, or how you talk to that other inmate. How do you talk to your old gang mates when you meet them out on the street after you get released? Here's how you got to do it. Now, that might be a fella in the audience. And of course, he's not just talking to the character on stage. He's talking to himself. He's talking to every one of his peers in the audience. He's talking to the prison officers around. And sometimes we would do these performances with prison families invited also. Sometimes we even did the performances when they had their kids there too. And obviously that would change the nature of what we're presenting on stage. So entertainment, yes, very much serious issues, often life and death issues. Was it therapy? We certainly didn't call it therapy. Was there something therapeutic about it? Well, I know from many men coming up to me after the shows that they found it very profound and very meaningful. And of course, we'd get invited back to those prisons. But that was only half the work, because the other half of the work was the workshops that we would run. And in those workshops, we might have 20 or 25 men for 3 hours, sometimes for 3 days, and sometimes we would stay for 2 weeks. And at the end of those 2 weeks, they would very often produce a play of their own, and that play would be performed for the rest of the prison. So there you have the possibility of influencing the culture within the prison, because you've got a group of inmates that you're working with, and then you have this communal activity of everybody coming together and seeing this great achievement that they have produced. We try to give it some good production values too. Quite often we would have sets and costume, and lots of different parts of the prison would get involved in producing the costumes, producing the sets. We'd get the workshop involved. Sometimes officers' wives would be stitching together costumes at the last minute. It was quite the community effort. And so there you have the possibility of theater being used as a way of creating a more conducive environment where people can make positive changes, which is, of course, one of the really important opportunities you have when people are in prison, that you can help people to make positive changes in their life.
I realized I have my idea of prison from the current mainstream artistic depiction of it, which is quite negative, quite raw, and I can't think too much about growth in the prison. So you're challenging this with what you say. And I'm wondering, what was the process to recruit people? You were invited to the entire prison, so you're talking about 500. It was a subset. Like, how were those people chosen to be part of the audience at first? And I will just try to tell you what I understood from what you say. It seems that you were recruiting some of the people from those 500 who were attending, and they were volunteers, and then with those you would work. And there was so much good energy or positive energy of interest that you managed to get the entire community to be interested. So instead of looking like something stupid to do, it was like, wow, that was actually profound. And they're inviting to do something I would like to be part of. I like how it changed during this hour. I would like to be part. That's the kind of thing.
That's right. That's right. And usually the recruitment for people attending the workshop would be done through the education department, sometimes through the chaplaincy, but usually through the education department, and sometimes also just simply through the recreation department. In some of the prisons, it was called the Leisure Time Activities Coordinator. But in the United States, the prison systems change a lot state by state. In the British prison system, it would often be done through the education departments. Not always. And in terms of the large audiences, sometimes the large audiences were just taken from sections of the prison. We're going to release these 3 wings to come to the gymnasium or into the chapel.
Did you feel safe?
Well, it's interesting that, because as a theater company, we had to know the security rules extremely well. And the theater company that's still going today, they're so good with security and security understanding that the prison officers very often compliment them on saying, you know more about the safety rules than we do. And that's because indeed they may have been doing it for 10 years and the prison officer might have been doing it for 2 years. There's lots of little tricks and tips to do. One of them is to just always make sure that none of the theater company are isolated.
If you have 500 people, there's no boundary between you, like the stage, and the people, or there was a boundary?
I understand the reason you're asking that question, but even in those really intense situations of 500 people packed in a gymnasium and there's only 2 or 3 guards off to the side, we were concerned about safety, but we never got fearful of our safety. It's an interesting thing about prisons, but prison guards don't really run prisons. Inmates run prisons. So there's an awful lot of self-management, self-monitoring, self-correction that goes on in those kinds of situations. The women in the company would sometimes get unwanted attention. But again, we had all different kinds of ways of making sure that everyone was kept safe. And so, yeah, being conscious of that. But actually, when we, as a theater company, go into a prison, in some ways, what we represent is not authority and oppression. What we represent is freedom. And so people who are coming to the performances or coming to the workshops, in almost all situations, what they recognize is that we're there and we're presenting them with an opportunity. And there's a good feeling that comes with it. And that's, in almost all situations, that's what we were met with. Even in the very, very heaviest prisons in America, we went into some of the supermax prisons, the super high security ones. And again, we're representing an idea about society being concerned about them and wanting them to still feel part of the world, part of the community, and bridging the wall, so to speak. And in almost all situations, that's the spirit in which we were welcomed into the prison. And again, that theater company continues to do its good work. And it's not the only one that does this. There are lots of theater companies that work within prisons and also on both sides of the wall. Also theater companies devoted to helping ex-prisoners find their way into the theater. And during the 40 years or so that I've been involved in this kind of work, there's been a whole sub-industry of arts organizations working in prisons internationally. Britain's probably at the forefront of that, but really it happens in many countries. And that, I think, will continue to grow.
Got it. And have you tried this kind of setup where you do a show at the beginning and then you recruit people for them to do their own show inside organizations like companies, but it doesn't have to be NGO? You were talking about NGOs, so that people carry on as theater producers instead of being consumers.
I haven't personally, but I do know of people who have done that. There's a particular author that I've followed over the years called Johnny Saldana, and he writes about a form that he calls ethnodrama and ethno-theater. And he will work within organizations and help them to create dramas based on their own experiences. And he's got quite an elaborate process. He's one of the first people I would go to for that. But there are other people like Michael Rohde, Rohd, who's written some about that.
Okay, I'll check them out. You talked about the drama spiral. So could you talk about it in simple language for people who have no clue what it is? And I'll put the visuals so that people can understand what we're talking about.
Sure. So the drama spiral is a ring of concentric circles. For those people who are watching on video, I'm holding it up at the moment. It's got a series of, it looks a little bit like an ammonite. It spirals in towards the center in 6 rings of a spiral. And the basic idea is that you start at the outer edge, the first ring of the spiral, and as you move further and further towards the middle of the spiral, the stories are getting more and more personal and more sensitive as you move towards the middle of the spiral. The model is relevant in any arts context, but particularly for theater and drama contexts. But you could also use it in other arts contexts. Any arts context where people's personal stories might be used. And the purpose of the drama spiral is so that you, as a facilitator, can make conscious choices with your participants about how deep they go into their own personal work, or do they keep it more distant from their personal stories. So at the first ring of the spiral, you have games and exercises, things like group builders, icebreakers, name games, getting to know you type activities, the sort of activities where people are having experiences together, perhaps quite energetic experiences together. You mentioned Tony Robbins earlier, and they might be doing trust exercises, getting to know you type activities. You're knitting the group together. Now, there are many group contexts where I've worked where that's the level that I stay at, because maybe I've got 2 hours with a group of people, and that's what they want to do. That's what they've signed up for, and that's where we stay. So games and exercises are very rich material. And as you mentioned earlier, you can learn a lot about yourself doing those kinds of activities. So one of the really important concepts here is that as I go through the 6 rings of the spiral, never think that one is better or more meaningful than another. Each of the 6 rings of the spiral can be equally meaningful and transformative for the participants. Ring 2 of the spiral is about fictional or distant stories. So when I say fictional stories, this is basically the entire corpus of fiction that has ever been written. Plays, stories, novels, anything in the fictional realm that's ever been produced. That's the zone that you're in. But it can also be real stories, but that are distant from your group. So it might be an historical event, a true story. It might even be a current event, but not directly connected to anyone in the group. So that's ring 2 of the spiral. It's fictional and distant stories. And lots of theater processes, of course, involve working at the fictional level. And we go to the theater. We buy our ticket. We go to the theater. Typically, we watch a fictional story. And of course, lives can be transformed and huge meaning and learning can be taken from that process. The next level is fictionalized personal stories. And here we're in that genre that we know so well whenever we go to the cinema and we see based on true events. Some names and details have been changed to protect anonymity. It's that whole genre. And in the theater, there are many instances, and it's increasing, where participant groups will want to produce a play, but they don't want to tell their personal stories so directly. Maybe because they want to protect the innocent, maybe because they would be very embarrassed, maybe because there are certain very sensitive details which they need to keep private. And so using fictionalized versions of their personal stories, they can still tell their story, but without having the fear and the concern that more will be revealed than they wish to. At rings 4, 5, and 6, we're shifting gears quite a bit because here we're telling personal stories and people are acknowledging to the audiences, this is my story. They might even be on stage as one of the people telling the story, but not necessarily. But it will be understood by audiences that this is a true story. These are people's real names. These are real situations. It hasn't been fictionalized. The really important shift that we're making at 4, 5, and 6 is that the storyteller is the arbiter of what goes in that story. So you have to now refer very directly to the person whose story it is to say, is this the story that you want told? If we bring in this theatrical element, if we bring in this idea, is this accurate to your memory of the story? Will this help to enhance the way that you want to tell your story? So it's a very different focus when you're going through the production. You could say that we're working at a much more psychodramatic level now, because in psychodrama, we are very protagonist focused. We always refer back to the protagonist as the person because it's their story and you don't want to mess with their story without their consent. That would be an unethical thing to do. Now, the big distinction that I made, and I didn't really see this anywhere else in the literature, which is why I think it's probably the main contribution and the main new thing that the drama spiral has to offer, is that I make 3 distinctions about the types of themes you can address in personal stories. A really underutilized one is ring 4 of the drama spiral, which is positive personal stories. And here I think in the corporate sphere, if you're going to be accessing people's personal stories, I would strongly encourage you to start with positive personal stories. These are stories of strength, stories of resilience, stories of good experiences, good memories, maybe even celebrations, important life events, meaningful moments in your life. It could be a meaningful moment in the history of this company. It could be a meaningful moment in my growth as a worker here at this company. It might even be how I was welcomed on my first day in this company. Let me tell you the story of why I chose to come and work here based on the way they greeted me during the interview. Let's restage that moment. Why was that such a great moment? Looking at golden moments between managers and the people that they manage. Looking at golden moments that have happened within teams. What made that a golden moment? These are the positive personal stories. They can have huge meaning. And the reason it's often underutilized is it's probably because of a limitation of the connotations of the word drama. Because usually with drama, we think about conflicts, blood and guts, and people doing horrible things to each other. It kind of goes with that word drama. Yeah. But what I have found is staging personal stories has tremendous meaning and depth because it's the person themselves present in the room, sharing the story with us. And even more than that, it's a deeply human principle. It's a principle of existence, which is that wherever we have light, we also have shadow. And even if I'm presenting to you the happiest moment of my life, a day of celebration, it could be my wedding day, whatever that happy occasion might be, within that story, if you really look at the story and you pay attention, there's also going to be shadow somewhere in that story because it's a human story. And so part of your job as a facilitator, as a director, is to allow that story to come forth and also just using your artistic sensitivity to also recognize, okay, so that was this glorious, happy, shining day. What made it so meaningful for you? It was so meaningful for you because of all of the effort that it took to get to that place in your life, or all of the sadnesses that came before, or the person who wasn't there at the table. Okay?
Yeah.
And that gave it all the more meaning. And so it's not that you turn it into a sad story. You don't mess with the story, but you use your artistic sensibilities in the staging of that moment to acknowledge the true significance and meaning of why that makes that such a positive experience. And then at rings 5 and 6 of the spiral, at 5, you're going to stories of resolved difficulties. Again, this is an underutilized area of personal story work. And this is that whole area that we learn about through the principles of post-traumatic growth. The idea is that people who've been through tough experiences can become wiser from those experiences. They can become stronger. One of the reasons we can become stronger is because we know we can survive. We've dealt with tough times. We've had to adapt. We've had to learn from those experiences. And maybe there was a period in our life where we were very vulnerable. We might have even been in prison or in psychological section, or we might have gone through a terrible divorce or an injury or an illness, the terrible loss of a loved one, whatever it might have been. Forced emigration, some of the themes that I've directed dramas about. I've often worked with kids in the care system, kids who were adopted from birth or had to be fostered out because of child abuse or neglect, working with kids with all kinds of vulnerabilities, but also strengths and stories of difficulties that were once very destabilizing for them, very triggering for them, but now they've reached a place of some consolidation. That story is no longer so triggering to them. But now they want to tell that story so that other people don't have to suffer like they did. And they want to share those stories because they feel it's a story that needs to be shared, and they have this strong desire to. And so those are also within the remit, I think, of skilled facilitators in the theater. And what makes that area tricky is to know the difference between rings 5 and ring 6. And this is where applied theater people are often very curious. Because at ring 6 of the drama spiral, we're talking about stories of unresolved difficulties. These are stories that can still be very triggering, stories that can be very destabilizing for people, make them vulnerable in ways that they can't quite control, understand, or manage. And that's where, as a facilitator, you need to have a lot of information and background in understanding the processes of trauma and how people can spontaneously re-traumatize themselves if you're not careful, how to contain the experience, to give it a proper lead-up, a proper ending, containing, how to do proper follow-up, and also to recognize when you are overwhelming people. And that's part of the reason why psychodrama training takes as long as it does, because you have to build up quite a lot of experience and knowledge about how to work with those situations, including situations where people spontaneously get triggered into a panic attack, for example, or a flashback re-experience. You're trying to avoid that. Sometimes it happens. Now, one of the things that I was amazed at during my PhD research is to discover that there are theater companies who work safely and ethically along that entire spectrum from rings 1 to 6 of the drama spiral. They're very special theater companies. The theater directors tend to have some extra training in counseling, therapy, or trauma-informed practice. They tend to work quite long-term with their groups. In other words, they don't just produce a play and then leave them. They tend to do a lot of follow-up with them. There's a particular company in Cardiff called Relive, and Alison and Karen, the two directors there, are much more than theater practitioners. They're also very astute with counseling skills and also trauma-informed practice. And I like their work so much that we co-wrote a book together, and it's called Creating Life Story Theater, and it just came out last year. The Drama Spiral is one of the chapters in that book. And it's all about their method of working with groups to help them stage life stories anywhere along that continuum that I've just given you. And they've done remarkable work, for example, with people who are combat veterans, people and families where there's a diagnosis of dementia. Those are two that stand out. I think they've also done work with homeless people, helping them to tell their stories. So part of the message here is that you don't have to be a trained psychotherapist or psychodramatist to do work at all rings of the drama spiral. But if you are a theater practitioner or an HR practitioner or a group facilitator, it's just really important to know what these boundaries are along the way and to know that there's really productive, deep, and meaningful work that you can do anywhere along that drama spiral.
Powerful. Is the spiral supposed to be inside like a spiral and outside like a spiral, or you can just find your way out from the middle? How do you close when you get to the middle? The reason why I'm asking this is because if you organize a long form retreat, for instance, which was my main interest when I started to talk to you, or if you do a long day, for instance, I'm trying to find out how to engineer that an experience that would take you deeper. I think they're too dangerous for corporate settings. I don't think the time is possible, and I think it's too dangerous for the talents or employees because they would be in a space that it's not made for that. But basically, I'm wondering how many hours do you need or how many days do you need to go to the end of it, and how many hours or days do you need to get out of it?
Yeah, I have experimented a bit with that time limit issue. And even with fully trained psychodramatists or psychotherapists generally, if I was only with them for one day, I'm very unlikely to go further than ring 4 of the spiral to positive personal stories if I've only got them for one day, if I'm just meeting them for the first time. We might occasionally go to ring 5 of the drama spiral. But if I'm going to go to ring 6, which is stories of unresolved difficulties, I'm going to want to be with them really a minimum of 3 days, because we use day 1 to do a lot of the foundation building and to begin to tell personal stories. And then everybody's getting a sense of whether they want to go deeper into more sensitive material. And then maybe we start to do that on day 2. And then on day 3, we might have a few sessions where we're dealing with the really vulnerable, triggering stories. But then I want to leave at least a half a day for a very gentle landing, where we might spiral right back out to ring 1 of the spiral, do games and exercises and light activities so that everybody ends in a contained way and nobody's leaving in a destabilized state. By the way, I did want to mention something in relation to what you said earlier about playing difficult roles in the theater that left you affected, because I think it does actually relate to this question. There's a field within the theater that you've probably aware of that's grown up since the Me Too movement, and it's the role of the intimacy director who comes onto the set or onto the rehearsal process where there's going to be physical intimacy between actors and coaches the actors in how to do that safely and ethically and with good boundaries to maintain everybody's emotional and sexual well-being. But likewise, there is now a subfield called the artist well-being practitioner who comes into theater productions, but also on television and film sets, where there's going to be emotionally difficult material, which is basically every trauma, potentially. But I know a practitioner called Lou Platt, based in Birmingham, England, and her practice is called the artist well-being practitioner. She's really at the forefront of this. She's one of the most experienced people in this work. And the idea of the artist well-being practitioner is somebody who can be on call and available and possibly doing regular visits to the rehearsal process, to the film set, to the TV set. And is basically that person that anyone in the cast or crew, from the director all the way through to the costume person, and as well as, of course, the actors, can access to do psychological debrief, psychological well-being work. And one of the really important processes that we understand in psychodrama is the process of de-rolling. How, after you've been deeply in a role, do you then come out of the role and make some really clear distinctions between that? Now, a lot of actors say, well, I'm a professionally trained actor. I go in and out of role all the time. It's not an issue for me. And that's fine for them. But for plenty of actors, it can be extremely disturbing. I worked with an actor some years ago who had to play a rape scene night after night as the attacker. And it was a very disturbing role for him. And it crushed him, the idea that people in the cast saw him in this way and they avoided him. And people in the street would remark about the role he played. And it was like a terrible stigma. And it was a burden for him, particularly because it was a long run. And so we did a lot of debriefing around that.
There's a term called emotional labor for people in hospitality, retail. So the people who have to basically keep a smile And as we need to be even more client-focused, client-centric, and take care of other people's needs and give a certain type of service, we are in these roles where they call, I don't remember who theorized this as emotional labor, but we are all in a way unable to act in the way we would like because we have to play a certain role. How does the de-rolling of psychodrama could help us as employees, talents, people who have roles in organizations to do this thing better at the end of the day when we are going back home?
Well, certainly, I think it could help. If you've got an uncomfortable role that you've been in that's different from your own role. I want to clarify, though, is this a role where you've basically been in your own role but doing a difficult job that has some emotional labor involved? It's not like you've entered into a role as an actor does, but that you're doing
exactly.
a difficult task.
There are multiple parts to it. So you could do, for instance, you're in charge of letting go of 500 people. So you use that as an instrument of the organization to do a role that would be difficult, and you won't be able to feel your feelings. You will be having to keep the face of the company, and you will have to follow probably an SOP or something. Never been my case, but I'm thinking about this one. And I'm thinking also about a client success person on the phone all day, taking care of clients' grievances, maybe pain and anger and whatever emotions. HR people actually have to deal with this all the time, having talents in the organization are not satisfied with their jobs or going through difficult moments. And maybe their personal selves would do a certain thing, but they need to act in another way. And so you have this kind of dissonance, both cognitive and emotional, that I would call emotional labor.
There, I would probably not use the term de-rolling, but I would use the term debriefing, which is I've come to the end of whatever really difficult piece of work it is that I've been doing. It's extremely useful to have somebody who understands what I've been doing to debrief with me, whether that's a peer, somebody else in the team, a more experienced member of the team. And it doesn't need to take long. It could be 15 minutes, but those 15 minutes are extremely well spent because they will help me to feel acknowledged, respected. The notion that that work was really emotionally taxing to me has been acknowledged and respected. And also the idea that I might be negatively affected has been acknowledged by somebody else. And the organization has paid for that person's time to debrief with me, even if it's 15 minutes. It might even be a phone call. Now, when I'm doing those sorts of debriefings, I use a very simple 3-part structure: content, process, feelings. And we don't have to do them in that order. They can all kind of intermix, but I want to make sure that we've covered each of them in a debrief. So content, did we actually do today or in this job of work what we had set out to do? Were there any variations on what we set out to do, and why was that? Process, what was the process we used to get there? How did we work together? Was I left on my own with tasks and that wasn't satisfactory? Did we work smoothly together? Could we improve the way that we're working as a team or as a co-working pair? And then feelings, really important, particularly as you've raised the topic of emotional labor. If something has been emotionally demanding, people need to be able to say safely and without fear of consequence, today I was horrified by what I had to do. Today I feel like crap because I've had to let go of some people that I know gave heart and soul to this company. But it had to be done for all of the reasons that we understand. I did my best with it ethically to do the job that needed to be done, but I still feel like crap. And then I can hear from you as my debriefer. Okay, now that you've acknowledged that, what's the meaning that you can find in this experience? Is it more than just feeling crap about the job that had to be done? But is there some meaning in this? Is there a bigger picture that we can look at here? Or do sometimes we just have to sit with things being really bad and full of grief, and it's kind of awful, and there's no way to make it look any better than it is. It's really awful, and it makes me sad, and I'm going to cry about it, and maybe I'm crying right now, but I'm doing it with somebody who has empathy for me and who respects me, and that can make a huge difference in whether people stay with these difficult jobs or not. In the prison service, I saw many instances of people receiving critical incident debriefing that helped them and helped them to return the job the next day. Say they were attacked by a prison officer. On the other hand, I also saw prison officers after a critical incident when the administration ignored them, wasn't interested, just got on with the bureaucracy of running the organization. And they were left so devastated by that, so abandoned, so betrayed, that it was the end of their career. I saw people walk away from 20, 30 years in the job because of nobody acknowledging that they'd been attacked by a prisoner and just ignoring all of the protocols about critical incident debriefing. It can make a huge difference. And it was the difference between taking 15 minutes or not taking 15 minutes with that person. This is something that whatever organization we work in, Geese Theater Company, for example, where I'm on the board of directors still, very occasionally they'll have a critical incident and they take it really seriously. And they have lots and lots of debriefing about it and lessons to be learned from it.
We were talking about the drama spiral, and the key of it is the distance. So keeping enough distance to stay in a safe distance of the topic we are trying to talk about. And right now we are talking about a practical case where two people who are co-working are talking about something that they can have more or less distance. How do you find the right distance and the right distance engagement with the topic or the trauma or the negative aspects, the pain? Because I can see that if you open the door to negativity, you could see it as negativity or pain, it can quickly go out of control. So as a practitioner, how do you dose in a way that people can still share their feelings, but not in a way that is too distant, because then the empathy doesn't work, right? So you need to find the right degree of separation. I don't know even how to express these things. How do you find the dose?
I'd say one of the ways that you do it as a facilitator, one of the fundamental skills you need, and I think actors who become facilitators can be quite good at this, is reading the room, picking up the temperature of a room, watching how people are with each other, watching how people are or are not making eye contact with you as the facilitator, regulating energy levels. If everybody's falling asleep, as a facilitator, you're going to get them up and energized. If everybody is looking at their phones and distracted, getting people focused on an activity that will take 100% focus. Maybe it's a problem-solving exercise or a trust exercise or a group exercise where they're accountable to each other, okay? Other exercises can really bring, if they're bouncing off the ceiling with energy, you can also center them. As a facilitator, you have all different kinds of tools in your toolkit for regulating the energy levels in the group and the amount of focus. And then if you want to start moving towards personal material, you start with the fictional level. That's what Ring 2 is about. So maybe I give them a task like, tell a story in 3 pictures. Tell us a well-known story in 3 pictures, silently. And we're going to try and guess the story. So maybe they pick a fable or a famous novel or a film, something. And then we watch them tell the story in 3 pictures. And it's a lot of fun because they've had fun generating it. And it's silent. It's just 3 frozen pictures telling a story. And we try to guess it. Oh, I think it's this story. I think it's that story. And now not only are they excited to present it, but also the audience is excited because it's like, oh, can I guess? Can I figure it out? Oh, yes, it's the story. Oh, yes, it's the story of Cinderella. I get it. Or it's the story of that famous battle. Okay, now we're working at the fictional level and people are really enjoying it. And say, okay, so we've got some choices here. We've got 3 hours left in our workshop. I was wondering if people might want to move into a different storytelling mode where you're sharing some of your own personal stories, but on a particular theme. I'd like you to tell a story about a golden moment in your first year at this company, a moment that you thought, wow, this is a really profound, good moment that gives me a sense of meaning and purpose at this company. Or maybe it was an interaction with a colleague or a customer, a golden, and it might just be 30 seconds. And I usually limit these early scenes to between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. And that's because we'll use a relatively short rehearsal period. It might just be 10 minutes. And then they'll stage those stories. And in those stories, they might be in the story as themselves. They might be in the story playing another role. Or they might stand out of the story and let the other people enact the story. But that provides a huge amount of rich material for exploration of corporate culture. What makes it worthwhile to work at this place? What makes for meaningful interactions between colleagues? What makes for really positive experiences that keep employees wanting to contribute to a positive corporate culture? And then, if that goes reasonably well, and you've got the time, you could say, okay, now let's maybe look at a tricky moment where it was suboptimal, where things could have been different. And maybe we'd like to see that scene. And then you can show us the scene how you would prefer for it to have gone. Okay? So we're not just looking at difficulties. We're also giving them the opportunity to say, it could have and should have been different.
You could take an unresolved story and then make it resolved on stage.
That's right.
Just to, yeah.
That's right. And using these processes can help to resolve stories. And in those instances, it's a really good idea. And Johnny Saldana does highlight this in his book, that these kinds of processes can work within organizations to help them to find solutions, to ways through.
I love it. When I thought about unresolved stories, I was more thinking about the entertainment value of them and not about how you could use them. I never would imagine actually going into that territory. I'm not ready for that. I was just thinking about how it could be interesting to see this on stage as a spectator. Now I can see the value of growth. And I was asking you about this dosage of distance and knowing what to do in order to create the right container, specifically in the coworking setup. So you have no choice. It's a negative situation. You want the person to express it to you so that you can empathize and show care. How do you make sure that we don't dive too deep and it's not too much, that it becomes re-traumatizing, or it basically creates so much tension that you finish the meeting and you're still there, right? So you gave kind of a key saying, okay, let's talk about how you would feel if this happens, or how would you resolve it? I think you're giving me a key there. But my main question is, how do you allow enough space but not too much space? And is there such a thing as enough space but not too much space? So do you control, or should you not control?
I would use the principle of co-production always. As a facilitator, you're constantly co-producing ideas and processes with your colleagues, but also with your participants. So what I do is I teach them the drama spiral, whatever age group I'm working with. And I've taught the drama spiral to groups of 15-year-olds that I was working with who wanted to produce a play. And on day one, I taught them the drama spiral. And by the end of day one, they were referring to the drama spiral when they were producing scenes for each other. And they were literally, this is a quote from a 13-year-old talking to a 14-year-old after they've just presented a scene. She says at the end of day one, I think when we produce this in the play on Friday, we should spiral out to ring 3 of the spiral to make it fictional, because that was really personal. That's a 13-year-old talking to a 14-year-old. So that was my confirmation that the drama spiral works as a tool that you teach to your participants, and they pick up the tool and they can use it to help themselves regulate. Now, some people are really keen to tell their traumatic story. And there, I think you have to step in as a facilitator and gently, empathically, but still firmly say, for the time that we have together, before, during, and after our production, and given the audience that's coming, I think we need to introduce these theatrical elements to bring a bit of distance to your story, because here's my concern. And then you would lay it out. And at a certain point, they have to meet you halfway, because they might be newcomers to the theater experience, and they might not understand the ramifications of putting that amount of raw, unprocessed material on the stage. And I have been in audiences, maybe you have too, where a performer, semi-professional performer typically, is putting their trauma on the stage. And it's like they're just putting it all out there. And there's something really raw and horrible happening on stage. And the audience is not only horrified, but deeply concerned for the psychological well-being of the performer. And because I saw that happen more than a few times, because I've attended a lot of theater in my life, and I thought, okay, not only is the actor in this situation making themselves very vulnerable, but they're traumatizing audiences here. Because I look around the audience and people want to run for the doors, and sometimes they do. Not because it's artistically challenging, but because it's traumatizing. And so we don't need to be traumatizing audiences. And in my PhD research, I paid a lot of very close attention to performers who took pride in presenting traumatic material on the stage. And the really good ones, the really experienced ones, were quite clear in their thinking about that. They say the only point that I will put that very painful story on the stage in front of a public audience is after I know that I have fully processed it. And I will get feedback from my director, okay? And he or she will tell me if I have a reasonably good understanding that it is resolved for me, because I don't want to re-traumatize myself on the stage, and I certainly don't want to re-traumatize my audiences. And those can be extraordinarily powerful performances. Some of them are one-person shows. Some of them are plays with multiple actors on stage. But there have been some instances of those, and they make great theater. But what makes them great theater is because the performers have full ownership of the material and they don't leave audiences concerned for their psychological well-being. That's not where you want to be as an audience member, thinking, oh my gosh, are you okay? It's a distraction from the artistic message that you're trying to get across.
If you take that specific aspect of regulating distance and doing it safely, when you think about an employee and a leader meeting after, like for a debriefing, let's say that the 500 people layoff, or I had a terrible client yelling at me and I was crying and now I'm talking to you. Is there a way to manage this using those processes that you've learned with theater so that the right amount of depth and sharing happens, but not too much? And so how do you control the container? And then how do you come out of it specifically in the organizational setting, just for people who are dealing with that specific situation? It happens quite a bit, actually, that we have negativity. And I think most people are trying not to have those negative conversations because they don't know how to deal with them. They don't know how to start them. They don't know how to end them. And when I say they, I can say hi in a few instances. So yeah, what can we use from the theater and maybe from your co-working research in order to create that space of safety in a way that is productive? I would just give you an example. I come to you, I'm sad and I'm almost crying, and I end up with you and I'm still crying after 15 minutes and say, okay, you give me a tissue and you walk away. I need to go to a meeting. So how do you make it happen? Is there any tip that you can give us?
Okay, well, the last example you gave there is fairly typical of what might happen in a therapy session. Assuming that we're not just meeting once and I don't know you, okay? If I have a reasonable understanding of who you are and you feel relatively safe with me, okay, and we know do we have 1 hour together? Is that a reasonable assumption? Okay.
We could, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Maybe you've got a very upsetting story to tell me, and I'm going to do my very best to listen to that story, to be patient with you, to be empathic with you, and to really understand it. And then, after you've cried for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I'm going to be conscious, okay, we've got about 20 minutes remaining. And I'll say that to you. Okay, Matt, we've got about 20 minutes left. And I know that this has been very upsetting for you. And I can see that you're still very deeply in your emotion. And in these 20 minutes, maybe it will be useful, because I know you've got to go to a really important meeting after this session. Maybe we can use these 20 minutes to try and find one or two things to help you ground you. Okay. For example, I'm mindful that 6 weeks ago, you faced a really similar difficult situation. And one of the things you did after that was, and then I can remind you of something that you did, you grounded yourself. What feels possible for you today as a way to ground yourself? Or what can you remind yourself of? Or remind me what you said about what your mentor told you. Or if I know you really well, remind me of that thing that your granddad used to say to you, that wise thing that you always remembered. So I can bring in these kinds of ideas. And maybe that's what that's going to do, is bring a bit of a state change from despair, anguish, rage to, oh, okay, at least I have a choice to make here. And Clark's reminding me that actually I'm capable of being deeply in my emotion, but also that I can take a step back and see the bigger picture here. And maybe the very best that I can do is to say, I've grounded myself enough to go into that meeting at 11 o'clock. And maybe what it is, I'm going to come back and see Clark tomorrow because I've got a really difficult decision to make, but I'm not going to make that decision right now. And so I'll make that agreement with you. So would you like to come back tomorrow and have some more time? Or shall we bring it up again next week? But
You're scaring me.
Why?
Sorry, please.
I'm scaring you?
I'll let you finish and then I'll tell you why you're scaring me as most of the persons working in organizations that have limited time. And you were talking about 1 hour and now I need to talk tomorrow. And I think you're gentle with me. You have a lot of background on what to do. You're experienced in this. Think about me more like I'm a new manager, or I'm a young manager, or I'm very overworked with let's say, getting the manufacturing process to work. And I work with you and okay, fine. Just, I need to run to the other meetings and I'll take the 15 minutes. So you talked about the debriefing and now I allowed you 1 hour because I wanted to see what you were going to say. But as a manager that I have plenty of things to do, it's almost easier to say, okay, I'm so sorry. I hope you're going to be okay, right? Hold on. And I run to my next meeting. I'm not saying that that's what I would do personally. I'm just saying that's the risk because there's so little time. So if we say to people, it's going to take you an hour and then it's going to take you more time tomorrow, that's why I'm saying it scares me because I don't have the time. So I prefer not to open the box than to open it and have all this. So I see advantages and the benefits of doing that, but I also see the cost, and I don't know if in my day-to-day I would be able to allow this.
Okay.
And
I get it. So what I say to prison officers, because prison officers are extremely busy people also. They're looking after maybe 300 inmates. They're doing a huge amount of regimented tasks through the course of the day. They might have hundreds of extremely brief interactions with inmates in the course of a day. And what I say to them is it doesn't take any longer to be attuned as to be unattuned to the people that you're working with. Okay, it doesn't take you any more time. In fact, you could probably argue that it takes less time to be attuned. And by attuned, what I mean is that you're paying attention. You're present. You're trying to be aware of what somebody is signaling to you. And if you're aware that somebody that you have some responsibility to, whether that's a colleague or a supervisee or simply another person in your organization, if you're aware that they've just come out of a really difficult situation or they're going into a difficult situation and you're reading some distress on them, you could take 2 minutes with them and it could help to transform their day. 2 minutes. And that could make the difference between them being able to carry on with their day or them to continue to ruminate on the fact that they're crap at their job or that they hate working here or nobody cares about them. No, because in that 2 minutes, somebody showed, yes, I value you. I see your distress. It matters to me that you're distressed. I care about you and also the fact that you're trying to hold it together and do a good job. I'm here with you. Do you need a hug? I'm not sure if that's corporate culture or not. Certainly in the organizations that I work within, many of them are quite huggy organizations because they have to be. Otherwise, people would just collapse. And when I say huggy, I don't literally mean physical hugging because I think you can hug people with your voice. You can hug people with the way that you look at them, the tone of your voice, the words that you use, how you position yourself near to them. And I think when men are talking to other men, sometimes it might just be the briefest touch on the shoulder to say, I gotcha. Or just a man looking at another man and I saying, I know this is tough. I can see it's tough. You can do it. That can be hugely meaningful because in that gaze, in that moment, there's a recognition.
There's one word that is used quite a bit, which is psychological safety. What do you think of it from your angle in organizations that are more corporate and maybe less huggy for the most part? To me, that's one of the key trendy words in organizational development. And I'm wondering what you've learned in theater that we could apply in leadership and organizations trying to achieve that leadership, that psychological safety. And I think the word is being overused. So I'm not dismissing it, but I think it's been overused. And I'm not sure that it's doing good to psychological safety development, that it's been overused. I'm interested in your point of view.
I would say that in order to promote psychological safety, particularly if you have themes like bring your whole self to work, okay? That has to be modeled from the top down, and it has to be modeled in front of people. They have to hear the senior managers or the CEOs or the senior management team in meetings, either live on video, recording, whatever it is, responding in the moment to difficult conversations. Not only paying lip service to the idea of we want to hear about the challenges you're facing. We want to hear how we can improve things. But seeing the senior leadership people actively responding in the moment and saying, thank you for that. I wasn't aware that those are the issues you're facing. We're going to have a working party. I'm going to sit in on that working party. We're going to sort this out. And to hear people modeling from the top down, and that will filter through the whole organization, how we deal with the difficult conversation. That uncomfortable person who some people think is a jerk, or it might also be the really quiet person who's got a different idea, a different approach, or they've stayed silent up to that moment. Now, how can we relate that to the theater? Well, I think it's a pretty direct one. The best theater directors are open to ideas from all of the cast members, and even the best film directors. I've heard stories about Stanley Kubrick on set, responding to an idea from an actor that completely transformed the way a scene was scripted and filmed, transformed the way a character was shot, and made the movie as magnificent as it was because an idea from quite an unexpected place emerged. Part of that also, I think, is people learning how to have difficult conversations. And one of my resources there is a book called Difficult Conversations. It's a great book, very accessible. and based on listening to hundreds and hundreds of difficult conversations and finding the common themes within them. What's the definition of a difficult conversation? A difficult conversation is a conversation that you keep putting off. That's the definition of a difficult conversation. Say, okay, so how can we learn to have difficult conversations? And people in senior positions, more experienced colleagues, supervisors, managers, senior management team, etc., need to proactively seek out the difficult conversations. Otherwise, the people lower down the corporate chain will stay silent because they feel like that conversation is not welcome. They'll just keep their head down. And some really important practice knowledge and practice wisdom will be lost. But if you proactively seek it, you become, I know it's a cliche, a learning organization. But learning organizations actively try to learn when things go wrong.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time today. For people who want to follow you or basically getting the latest news and what you're working on, how can they get in touch or find you?
Well, I'm the director of the Birmingham Institute for Psychodrama, so you can find me through that. I'm pretty Googleable, and my books most of them are available on all the well-known websites. I've got about 8 to 10 books where I'm either the author, co-author, or co-editor, and they range from criminal justice to attachment theory to applied theater to coworking and psychodrama. Those kinds of books are out there. And I'm on LinkedIn, so I'm easy to find on LinkedIn.
And for HR people, which one is the book you would recommend?
Oh, for HR people who don't particularly want to get into psychodrama or applied theater type stuff, I would certainly recommend my book, Mindful Coworking, because I wrote it very deliberately to apply to as many different types of organization as possible and as many different types of co-working collegial situations as possible. And there's a lot of gems in there in terms of knowledge that we developed over 10 years when we were teaching co-workers the art of co-working, myself and colleagues. And eventually we crystallized it into 5 principles and 5 additional sort of rules of interaction that I think are very practical, accessible, and can really enhance co-working.
Sounds good. And it's on Kindle? Yes. So I can read it easily from Malaysia. Perfect. Well, thank you, Clark, for taking the time. Really appreciate it.